Contracts ripped apart overnight. Grain ships stalled at the docks. Phone calls that once brought certainty now end with silence. For decades, American farmers stood at the center of the global food supply chain, feeding nations and fueling economies. But today, that dominance is crumbling. 7 of America's closest trade partners, countries that once depended almost exclusively on U.S. corn, are walking away. And they're not just buying from anyone. They're choosing Canada. This isn't just a shift in trade. This is a generational breaking point. If you think this is just about farmers losing contracts, think again. This collapse will ripple through food prices, livestock feed, ethanol fuel, and even the very stability of America's rural communities. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear could reshape the future of global agriculture, and it's a story you won't find told anywhere else. For over half a century, U.S. corn has been the backbone of world agriculture. It wasn't just an export, it was a symbol of American reliability. Nations looked to the Midwest as the breadbasket of the world. When ships left New Orleans loaded with corn bound for Asia, Latin America, and Europe, they carried more than grain. They carried trust. But in the span of just 1 year, that trust has shattered. From South America to Asia, from Europe to Africa, buyers are turning away from U.S. corn and locking in contracts with Canada. This is not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's the result of years of warning signs, signs ignored until now. And here's the truth, American farmers are not just losing markets. They are losing relevance. They are watching their future being written in someone else's fields. To understand how we got here, we need to look at the forces driving this exodus. On paper, the U.S. should still dominate global corn exports. It has the land, the yields, the infrastructure. But when you look closer, cracks begin to appear. Unpredictable trade policies. Tariffs that anger allies. Infrastructure bottlenecks that delay shipments. Climate disruptions that wipe out harvests. And an internal political gridlock that leaves farmers wondering if Washington even remembers they exist. Meanwhile, Canada has been quietly building something remarkable. Better rail systems. Stronger trade alliances. Investment in cutting-edge crop technology. And perhaps most importantly, a reputation for stability. When global buyers sign contracts with Canada, they know the grain will arrive on time, at the quality promised, without the drama of sudden tariffs or political interference. The difference is not just in logistics, it's in philosophy. Where America has treated agriculture as a bargaining chip in larger political games, Canada has treated it as a cornerstone of trust and diplomacy. Buyers are noticing. They see one country where the rules might change overnight, and another where agreements last. This combination, American instability versus Canadian reliability, has tipped the scales. And now, 7 key nations have made their choice. They've ripped up contracts with the U.S. and are moving their future with Canadian corn. Country 1, Japan. The first domino to fall was Japan. For decades, Japan was one of the largest and most loyal buyers of American corn. Every year, billions of dollars worth of grain made its way across the Pacific, fueling Japan's livestock industry and food sector. But that loyalty came at a cost. Japan needed consistency, and in recent years, America simply couldn't provide it. Trade wars, tariff threats, and inconsistent delivery times started to shake confidence. Add in droughts across the Midwest, where harvests fell short of expectations, and Japan found itself scrambling. At the same time, Canada stepped forward with a promise, contracts that would be honored, shipments that would be on time, and grain quality that matched or even exceeded U.S. standards. The Japanese government and major agricultural importers signed long-term deals with Canadian suppliers. What began as an experiment has now become the new normal. Japan didn't just dip its toe into Canadian corn, it dove in headfirst. The message to the U.S. was loud and clear: stability matters more than tradition. And once Japanese companies invested in new infrastructure, like expanded port facilities tailored to Canadian shipments, the relationship solidified. America lost not just a customer, but a future pipeline of trade that may never return. Country 2, Mexico. Perhaps the most painful blow for the U.S. came from its own neighbor, Mexico. For years, Mexico was America's #1 corn buyer, relying on U.S. shipments to feed its massive livestock sector and its people. But constant political battles over tariffs on everything from steel to avocados poisoned the relationship. When Washington began threatening to weaponize corn trade in political disputes, Mexico had enough. Canadian corn, while slightly more expensive in some cases, offered predictability. And for Mexico, that was priceless. Farmers in Sinaloa and Jalisco no longer had to worry about sudden tariff spikes or shipments stuck at U.S. ports. Canadian exporters stepped in with rail links through the Midwest up into Canada, delivering grain south faster and with fewer interruptions. What was once unthinkable, Mexico walking away from U.S. corn, has now become reality. And for American farmers in Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska, losing Mexico feels like a dagger straight to the heart. Country 4, Spain. Europe has always been a complicated market for American farmers, but Spain was one of the few consistent buyers of U.S. corn. The demand was driven by Spain's massive livestock industry, particularly in pork production, which relies heavily on feed grain imports. For years, U.S. corn had the price advantage, and Spain leaned on that. But in the past few years, Europe's environmental and trade regulations grew tighter. Concerns about pesticide use, GMO crops, and carbon emissions started weighing on Spain's decision-makers. Canada offered a cleaner, greener image, with stricter regulations on certain chemicals and a willingness to certify products to meet EU standards. That gave Canada the edge. Spanish buyers began quietly shifting contracts away from the US and toward Canadian suppliers who could meet the EU's complex requirements without the political fights. The result? American grain that once sailed into Barcelona now sits piled up in silos across the Midwest, waiting for buyers who never come. And in Spain, the shift is becoming permanent. Importers have invested in new storage and transport systems tailored to Canadian corn. Once that infrastructure is in place, the US doesn't just lose a shipment, it loses the future of the trade lane. Country 5, Egypt. The switch in Egypt shocked many analysts. As the most populous nation in the Arab world, Egypt relies on imports to feed its people and livestock. Traditionally, US corn was a cornerstone of Egypt's food security. But as inflation surged and currency crises hit, Egyptian leaders needed suppliers who wouldn't threaten sudden price spikes or political strings attached. Canada stepped in with aggressive financing packages and stable contracts that offered Egypt predictability. US exports, by contrast, had become entangled in broader geopolitical disputes. Egyptian officials admitted, off record, that they were tired of being caught in the crossfire of American trade wars. By moving toward Canadian corn, Egypt secured not only stable supply but also a partner less likely to interfere in domestic politics. For Washington, it was a blow. For Midwest farmers, it was a disaster. Egypt represented both volume and prestige. Losing it meant losing both money and influence in a region America could ill afford to ignore. And more importantly, Egypt's pivot served as a signal to other nations in North Africa and the Middle East: if Cairo was willing to break with tradition and embrace Canada, then so could they. The US wasn't just losing a buyer, it was risking an entire region. Country 6, Brazil. This one stings in a different way. Brazil is itself a massive agricultural powerhouse. It competes directly with the United States in soybeans, sugar, and beef. For years, Brazil bought US corn only when domestic supplies ran low. But trade disputes and fluctuating American prices pushed Brazil to look north instead of northward across the hemisphere. Canadian corn offered what Brazilian buyers needed: a supplemental supply without the drama of dealing with Washington's unpredictable trade policies. And beyond the grain itself, Brazil's government saw an opportunity to deepen its agricultural ties with Canada while keeping competition with the US at arm's length. The symbolism was powerful, one agricultural superpower choosing to bypass another in favor of a supposedly secondary supplier. For the US, it was a humiliation, plain and simple. Brazil's move wasn't about sheer necessity, it was about optics, about sending a message. By embracing Canada, Brazil was quietly undermining US credibility while bolstering its own global standing. For American farmers, that meant losing not just a market, but prestige in the eyes of their fiercest competitor. Country 7, Nigeria. Nigeria was the seventh nation to flip, and while smaller than Japan or Mexico in terms of total contracts, its choice sent shockwaves through the agricultural world. Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, is rapidly industrializing and urbanizing. Its demand for corn as food and livestock feed is growing exponentially. Traditionally, the US saw Nigeria as a market it could dominate, offering volume, scale, and reliability. But once again, instability and political interference ruined that trust. Nigerian buyers grew wary of relying on US shipments that could be disrupted by tariffs, sanctions, or even shipping bottlenecks. Canada entered with an offer Nigeria couldn't refuse: stable prices, improved trade financing, and even agricultural development partnerships to help Nigeria build up its own food security. To Nigerian officials, that wasn't just a supplier, it was a partner. And so, Nigeria turned away from the US, cementing Canada's role as a growing agricultural powerhouse in Africa. Even more alarming for Washington, Nigeria's decision could spark a domino effect across West Africa, where governments are watching closely. If Nigeria, the region's giant, trusts Canada over the United States, others may follow suit, and that would accelerate America's decline in yet another crucial continent. The ripple effects back home. For American farmers, the loss of these 7 nations is more than just lost sales, it's a dagger into the heart of rural America. Imagine this: a farmer in Iowa who spent decades planting corn, confident that the world would always need what he produced. He took out loans to expand his farm, invested in new machinery, and passed the legacy down to his children. But now, as contracts vanish, that same farmer is staring at silos full of unsold grain, banks demanding repayment, and a future that feels uncertain at best. Across the Midwest, small towns are already feeling the collapse. Local businesses, from tractor dealerships to diners, depend on farm income. When farmers can't sell their crops, they cut back. Equipment purchases stop. Restaurant tables sit empty. Schools and hospitals, funded by local tax revenue, struggle to keep their doors open. It's not just farmers losing income, it's entire communities losing their lifeline. The collapse of US corn exports is triggering a chain reaction that reaches far beyond the fields. Why Canada is winning. So how did Canada, a nation long seen as a secondary player in global agriculture, suddenly leapfrog the United States in corn exports? The answer lies in 3 simple words: stability, technology, and trust. First, stability. Canada does not weaponize its food supply. Buyers know that a contract signed in Ottawa or Saskatchewan will be honored, no matter who sits in government. Canadian politics are not perfect, but compared to the bitter trade wars and tariff threats coming out of Washington, Canada looks like a calm harbor in a storm. Nations value that predictability more than they value rock-bottom prices. Second, technology. Canada has invested heavily in crop science, precision farming, and climate-resilient corn hybrids. While US farmers often struggle with aging infrastructure and political fights over subsidies, Canadian producers are quietly innovating. They're producing corn that can survive droughts, withstand pests, and deliver consistent yields even in unpredictable weather. Buyers see that resilience as a hedge against climate change. Third, trust. Canada has worked hard to build an image as a reliable partner. Trade officials spend years nurturing relationships, smoothing over disputes, and crafting long-term agreements. In contrast, US trade officials in recent years have used exports as bargaining chips, threatening allies, slapping tariffs, and tearing up agreements overnight. That approach might score short-term political wins, but in the long game, it destroys trust. And once trust is gone, it's nearly impossible to win back. Historical parallels. This isn't the first time American agriculture has faced collapse. In the 1980s, the US farm crisis devastated rural America. Farmers lost their land, suicide spiked, and entire communities withered. But that crisis was largely internal, driven by high interest rates, falling land values, and debt. Today's crisis is different. Farmers aren't just being crushed by economics, they're being replaced. The expertise, the machinery, and even the loyalty of global buyers are migrating elsewhere. Instead of US farmers being forced out of the market entirely, they are being forced to watch Canada rebuild the empire America once had. There's also a historical irony here. For decades, the US warned developing nations not to rely too heavily on one supplier for food. Diversify, Washington said, or risk being at the mercy of politics. Today, those same words are being turned back against America. Nations are diversifying away from US corn, and the US can do nothing to stop it. Global implications. This is bigger than a trade dispute. The shift to Canadian corn signals something deeper: the erosion of America's soft power. Food is not just about calories. It is leverage. It is influence. For decades, when the US supplied a nation's food, it also shaped that nation's policies. But now, with countries like Japan, Mexico, and Egypt looking north, America's leverage is vanishing. The geopolitical consequences are massive. If Canada cements its role as the new agricultural superpower, it gains not just contracts but influence. Decisions in Ottawa will carry weight in capitals around the world. Canada, a nation once dismissed as a junior partner in global trade, could find itself shaping international policy through something as simple, and as powerful, as corn. Meanwhile, America's rivals are watching closely. China, Russia, and Brazil see opportunity in America's stumble. If the US cannot even hold on to its closest allies in the corn market, how can it hope to project strength elsewhere? The loss of agricultural dominance becomes not just an economic crisis, but a strategic one. And here's the hard truth: once trust is lost, once supply chains are reoriented, once infrastructure is built for Canadian grain instead of American, there is no going back. The world is realigning, and America is being left behind. So where does this leave us? With 7 nations walking away, Canada rising fast, and American farmers watching their livelihoods collapse, the future looks uncertain. But there's still one chapter left to tell: what happens next, and whether America can recover, or if this truly is the breaking point for US agriculture. The collapse of US corn exports is not just about 7 countries walking away. It's about what happens next. Because once these contracts are gone, they don't come back easily. Supply chains are sticky. Grain elevators, rail systems, shipping routes, all of it gets restructured to handle Canadian corn instead of American. And once those systems are built, global buyers have no reason to return to the US. For American farmers, that means the pain will not stop with this season. It will extend into the next, and the next, as the world grows accustomed to a new supplier. Bankruptcies will rise. Younger farmers will leave the land. Rural communities will hollow out. And the United States, once the world's breadbasket, will find itself increasingly irrelevant in the very markets it built. It's not just about exports. Domestically, the surplus of unsold corn will flood local markets, driving prices down. Farmers will be forced to sell at losses, while input costs, seed, fertilizer, equipment, continue to rise. Families who have farmed for generations will be forced to make heartbreaking decisions: sell the land, or sink deeper into debt. And beyond the farm, the ripple effects will strike at small-town America. Local banks, schools, and businesses that depend on farm income will feel the squeeze. What was once a thriving agricultural economy risks collapsing into a cycle of decline, leaving behind empty fields, boarded-up storefronts, and a legacy of neglect that no government bailout can truly repair. Can America recover? The question now is whether America can recover. Can US farmers rebuild trust with buyers who feel betrayed? Can Washington step back from using food as a weapon and return to treating it as a bridge of diplomacy? Some experts believe the US could claw back some of its market share, but only with sweeping changes: rebuilding infrastructure, re-establishing long-term trade agreements, and embracing the kind of stability Canada now represents. That would mean billions in investment, bipartisan cooperation, and a new humility in dealing with international partners, things that have often been in short supply. Others are less optimistic. They argue that the world has already moved on, that Canada, and perhaps soon Brazil and Argentina, have cemented their place as the future of corn exports. And maybe that's the hardest truth to face: America's agricultural dominance, once thought unshakable, may be gone for good. If the US fails to act quickly and decisively, the very farmers who fed the world could become spectators in a market they once controlled. The global food chessboard. Make no mistake, this is bigger than corn. This is about the new rules of global trade. When countries choose Canadian corn over US supply, they're not just choosing grain. They're choosing who they trust to feed their people in times of crisis. They're choosing who they want to be tied to for the next decade, maybe longer. And in that choice, America is losing. Canada is winning. The balance of agricultural power is shifting, and with it, the balance of global influence. Food has always been a silent weapon of diplomacy, as powerful as oil or steel. By losing credibility in the corn market, the United States is ceding ground not just to Canada, but to a broader coalition of nations eager to rewrite the rules. What was once a US-led system of food security is now fragmenting, and every lost contract is another move on the chessboard, a move that redraws the map of global power. Outro and strong call to action. So the next time you hear about corn exports, don't think of it as just numbers on a trade report. Think of it as a window into the future. A future where America is no longer the unquestioned breadbasket of the world. A future where nations that once depended on US farmers now look north, to Canada, for stability and trust. A future where American towns and families pay the price for decisions made far away in Washington. This is not just an economic story. It is a story of survival, of betrayal, and of a new world order taking shape in the fields of corn. And here's the thing, this story isn't over. The next chapter is being written right now, in silos, in trade offices, and in the homes of farmers across the Midwest. But if America doesn't act, if it doesn't confront the reality of its collapse, then that chapter may be the last. What do you think? Can the US recover its dominance in global agriculture, or is Canada now the future? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, I want to hear from you. And if you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure you hit that like button, share this video so others can see what's happening, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories shaping our world. Because while this collapse may seem like just another trade dispute, the truth is clear, when food shifts, the world shifts with it. And right now, the world is shifting away from the United States.